You know, there are moments in life that are so powerful, so raw, they transcend everything we thought we knew about fame, pride, and human emotion. March 27, 1987. A funeral service in Los Angeles. The air thick with grief. Hollywood's brightest stars gathering to mourn a young man taken far too soon. But this wasn't just any funeral. This was the day the impossible happened. The day Dean Martin, broken and barely able to stand, walked across a chapel toward the one man he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Jerry Lewis. And standing witness to this moment were two of the most legendary entertainers who ever lived, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. What happened in those few seconds would shatter everyone in that room. Nobody expected this. Nobody could have predicted what Dean would do. And what he whispered to Jerry. It changed everything. Let me take you back to understand how we got here, because this story doesn't start at a funeral. It starts decades earlier, in a world of bright lights, sold-out shows, and two men who became the biggest comedy team America had ever seen. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Just saying those names together feels right, doesn't it? Like peanut butter and jelly. Like thunder and lightning. They were magic together. Pure, undiluted magic. From 1946 to 1956, they were unstoppable. They sold out nightclubs, dominated radio, conquered television, and made movies that had audiences rolling in the aisles. Dean was the smooth, effortless crooner, the handsome straight man with that velvet voice and laid-back charm. Jerry was the wild, rubber-faced comedian who could make you laugh until your sides hurt. Together, they were lightning in a bottle. They weren't just partners. They were brothers. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. But behind the laughter, behind the sold-out shows and the million-dollar contracts, something was fracturing. You see, success has a funny way of exposing cracks that were always there, hidden beneath the surface. Dean Martin was beginning to feel stifled. He was tired of being the straight man, tired of being the setup for Jerry's punchlines. He had dreams of being taken seriously as a singer, as an actor. He wanted to step out of the shadow and prove he was more than just the guy who held the microphone while Jerry got the laughs. Meanwhile, Jerry was becoming increasingly controlling. He was a workaholic who wanted to direct every aspect of their performances, their films, their careers. He saw the act as his baby, and Dean was beginning to feel more like an employee than an equal partner. The tension built slowly, like water behind a dam. Their final film together, Hollywood or Bust, released in 1956, was appropriately titled. By then, they could barely stand to be in the same room together. The chemistry that had made them legendary was replaced by cold professionalism at best and simmering resentment at worst. On July 25, 1956, exactly 10 years to the day after they first teamed up, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis officially split. The announcement sent shockwaves through Hollywood and broke the hearts of millions of fans who couldn't imagine one without the other. But here's the thing that most people don't understand about the breakup. It wasn't just professional. It was deeply, painfully personal. These weren't just business partners going their separate ways. These were two men who had shared everything: stages, dressing rooms, homes, family dinners, the birth of their children, their greatest triumphs and their darkest fears. Jerry's kids called Dean Uncle Dean. Dean's children adored Uncle Jerry. They had been woven into the fabric of each other's lives so completely that separating felt like tearing apart something sacred. And then came the silence. Not a phone call. Not a letter. Not even a message sent through mutual friends. 20 years of absolute silence. Can you imagine that? Two men who once finished each other's sentences, who could communicate with just a look, who knew each other's rhythms better than their own heartbeats, suddenly acting as though the other person didn't exist. In Hollywood, they would attend the same parties, the same premieres, the same events, and they would orbit around each other like opposing magnets, never making eye contact, never acknowledging the massive elephant in every room they entered. But there were three men watching this silent tragedy unfold with growing concern. Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., and Joey Bishop, Dean's brothers in the Rat Pack. They had watched Dean transform from the carefree, easygoing guy who could make everyone laugh into someone more guarded, more distant. Oh, he still had that trademark cool, that effortless charisma on stage, but his friends could see the weight he carried. And they knew that part of that weight was named Jerry Lewis. Frank Sinatra, in particular, couldn't let it go. Frank was many things: a perfectionist, a control freak, fiercely loyal to those he loved, and absolutely relentless when he set his mind to something. He had watched his two friends destroy each other with silence, and he decided enough was enough. In 1976, Frank hatched a plan. Jerry Lewis hosted an annual Labor Day telethon for the Muscular Dystrophy Association, a grueling, emotional marathon broadcast that Jerry poured his heart into every year. Frank called Jerry and told him he wanted to appear on the telethon. Jerry was thrilled. Having Frank Sinatra on the show would be incredible for ratings and donations. What Jerry didn't know was that Frank had another guest in mind. September 5th, 1976. The telethon was in full swing. Jerry was on stage, doing what he did best, entertaining, pleading for donations, making people laugh and cry in equal measure. Frank Sinatra walked out to thunderous applause, and the two old friends embraced. They sang together, joked together, and then Frank said something that made Jerry's blood run cold. "I have a friend who loves what you do every year and wanted to come out and just say hello." The cameras didn't catch it, but if you watch Jerry's face in that moment, you can see the flicker of realization, the split second of panic before he composed himself into a smile. And then Dean Martin walked onto that stage. After 20 years of silence, 20 years of avoiding each other at every turn, 20 years of pretending the other person didn't exist. And suddenly, there they were, face to face, in front of millions of viewers watching live across America. The audience went absolutely insane. The crew was crying. Frank stood back with a satisfied smile, knowing he'd done what needed to be done. And Jerry broke down. He couldn't help it. When Dean walked over and embraced him, Jerry wept openly on live television. Dean held him, and for a few brief, beautiful moments, it was like the past 20 years melted away. They weren't bitter ex-partners. They were brothers finding each other again. But here's the thing about reconciliation. It's messy, it's complicated, and it doesn't erase decades of hurt overnight. That telethon moment was powerful, yes, but it didn't magically fix everything. After the cameras stopped rolling, Dean and Jerry went their separate ways again. They were cordial now, no longer enemies, but they weren't the inseparable duo they once were either. The bridge had been rebuilt, but it was narrow, fragile, and neither man seemed quite sure how to walk across it. Life moved on. Dean continued performing, hosting his television variety show, and being the cool, unflappable legend that America loved. Jerry kept making movies, directing, performing, and raising millions for muscular dystrophy research. Frank, Sammy, and the rest of the Rat Pack continued their reign as the kings of cool. And somewhere in all of this, time kept ticking forward, as it always does, indifferent to our plans and our pride. Dean Martin had 8 children, but one of them held a special place in his heart. Dean Paul Martin. Everyone called him Dino Jr., or just Dino. Born on November 17, 1951, Dino Jr. was, by all accounts, Dean's golden boy. He wasn't just handsome like his father. He was talented, driven, charismatic. He was a professional tennis player in his youth, competing at Wimbledon and the U.S. Open. He was a musician, playing with the band Dino, Desi, and Billy alongside Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinch. He was an actor, appearing in films and television shows. And then, later, he became a pilot, a captain in the California Air National Guard, flying F-4 Phantom jets. Dean loved all his children, but with Dino, there was something extra. Maybe it was because Dino was named after him. Maybe it was because Dino seemed to inherit not just Dean's looks but his easy charm, his talent, his star quality. Or maybe it was simply the ineffable bond between a father and son who truly understood each other. Dean was proud of everything Dino accomplished, but he was especially proud of Dino's service as a military pilot. Dean would tell anyone who would listen about his son, the fighter pilot, the officer, the hero. March 21, 1987. It was supposed to be a routine training mission. Captain Dean Paul Martin and his weapons systems officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz, took off in their F-4C Phantom jet from March Air Reserve Base near Riverside, California. They were heading to March Air Force Base in Southern California for a routine training exercise, simulated bombing runs in the San Bernardino Mountains. It was the kind of mission Dino had flown dozens of times before. Routine. Standard. Safe. But somewhere over the San Bernardino Mountains, something went terribly wrong. The weather was deteriorating: snow, poor visibility, the kind of conditions that can disorient even experienced pilots. According to the reports that would come later, Dino may have experienced vertigo. The ground controller at Ontario Airport issued a command to change direction to avoid the mountain peak ahead. But the message either didn't get through or came too late. At approximately 1:15 p.m., the F-4 Phantom crashed into the peak of Mount San Gorgonio, the highest mountain in Southern California, at an elevation of over 10,000 feet. The impact was catastrophic. The jet disintegrated. Both Dino and Captain Ortiz were killed instantly. For 3 days, the wreckage couldn't be located. 3 agonizing days of searching through treacherous mountain terrain, through snow and freezing temperatures. Dean Martin spent those 3 days in a state that his friends described as catatonic. He barely spoke. He didn't eat. He just sat, waiting for news that, deep in his heart, he already knew. When the wreckage was finally found on March 24th and the deaths confirmed, something inside Dean Martin died too. Friends and family said that Dean was never the same after Dino's death. The man who had always been the epitome of cool, who made everything look effortless, who could charm anyone with just a smile. That man disappeared. What was left was a shell, going through the motions of living but not really alive anymore. Jean, Dean's ex-wife and Dino's mother, was devastated. The entire Martin family was shattered. But Dean? Dean was somewhere beyond grief. He had entered a place where words couldn't reach, where comfort was meaningless. 8 days after Dino's death, Dean Martin had a scheduled performance at Bally's Casino in Las Vegas. His manager begged him to cancel. His friends told him he didn't have to do this. But Dean, true to form, said he would perform. On March 29, 1987, Dean Martin walked onto that stage in front of 2,400 people. The audience had come expecting the usual Dean Martin show: smooth singing, easy jokes, that trademark charm. What they got instead was something none of them were prepared for. Dean walked out, and you could see it immediately. This wasn't the Dean Martin they knew. His eyes were hollow. His smile was forced. He started singing "Everybody Loves Somebody," his signature hit, and about halfway through, his voice cracked. He stopped singing. The band kept playing, but Dean just stood there, microphone in hand, tears streaming down his face. And then he spoke 4 words that would haunt everyone in that audience for the rest of their lives. "I'm sorry. I can't." And he walked off the stage. 2,400 people sat in absolute silence. Some were crying. Some were in shock. This was Dean Martin, the king of cool, the man who never broke, and they had just watched him shatter in real time. That performance, or rather, that non-performance, became legendary not for what Dean did, but for what he couldn't do. It was the most honest, vulnerable moment of his entire career, and it was born from unspeakable pain. The funeral for Dean Paul Martin was scheduled for March 27, 1987, at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills, followed by a memorial service at the Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park. It would be a who's who of Hollywood: Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Lucille Ball, Dorothy Hamill, Olivia Hussey, and hundreds of others. But the 2 people everyone wondered about were Dean and Jerry. Jerry Lewis, when he heard about Dino's death, was devastated. Despite everything that had happened between him and Dean, Jerry had loved that family. He had watched Dino grow up. He remembered when Dino was just a little boy running around the set while Dean and Jerry filmed their movies. Jerry had held that child, played with him, been Uncle Jerry to him. And now that child was gone, and Dean was suffering in ways Jerry could only imagine. Jerry immediately knew he had to attend the funeral. Not because it was expected. Not because cameras would be there. But because despite 20 years of silence, despite all the hurt and pride and stubbornness, Dean was his brother. And brothers show up when it matters most. March 27th arrived with that particular kind of gray mourning that seems to mirror collective grief. The Church of the Good Shepherd, a beautiful Catholic church on Bedford Drive in Beverly Hills, was filling up with mourners. Photographers and news crews lined the streets, held back by security. This was, after all, Hollywood royalty in mourning, and the world wanted to witness it. Frank Sinatra arrived early, looking older than his 71 years, his face drawn with sorrow. Sammy Davis Jr. came with his wife, alto vice. Sammy, who had fought his own battles with illness and was himself not in the best of health, had insisted on being there. These were his brothers Dean and Dino. The Rat Pack took care of their own, always. Jerry Lewis arrived separately, moving through the crowd with uncharacteristic quietness. Usually Jerry was on even when he wasn't performing, cracking jokes, making people laugh, being the Jerry Lewis everyone expected. But not today. Today, he was just a man coming to mourn a boy he'd loved and to support a friend he'd lost and, in some small way, found again. And then Dean arrived. If you've ever seen someone in the grip of genuine, soul-crushing grief, you know the look. It's in the eyes, empty, staring at nothing and everything. It's in the posture, shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the world has become too much. Dean Martin, being helped from his car, looked like he had aged 20 years in 6 days. He walked slowly, supported by family members, and when he entered the church, a collective gasp went through the assembled mourners. This wasn't the Dean Martin they knew. This was a broken father who had buried his heart with his son. The service was beautiful and heartbreaking in the way only funerals can be. Eulogies were given. Songs were sung. Prayers were offered. People spoke of Dino's talent, his kindness, his service to his country, his love for his family. Through it all, Dean sat in the front pew, staring straight ahead, tears running silently down his face. Frank Sinatra, sitting a few rows back with Sammy, kept his eyes on Dean. Frank had seen a lot in his 71 years, triumph and tragedy, love and loss, but watching his friend go through this was almost unbearable. Sammy, who had always been the emotional heart of the Rat Pack, wasn't even trying to hide his tears. And Jerry Lewis, sitting on the other side of the church, couldn't take his eyes off Dean either. After the service, as people began to file out for the burial service, something extraordinary happened. Dean, who had been moving almost mechanically through the service, suddenly stopped. He was standing near the aisle, and he looked up. And there, across the church, was Jerry Lewis. For a moment, one eternal, suspended moment, they just looked at each other. Two old men who had once been young and invincible together. Two men who had shared everything and then shared nothing. Two men who had let pride and hurt build walls between them that had seemed insurmountable. And then Dean started walking. Frank Sinatra saw it first. He grabbed Sammy's arm and whispered, "Look." Everyone in that church seemed to realize simultaneously what was happening. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People froze. The photographers outside, sensing something, pressed closer to the windows. Dean Martin, moving through the pews, walked directly toward Jerry Lewis. His face was streaked with tears. His steps were slow but deliberate. And Jerry, seeing Dean coming toward him, stood up. Jerry's own face crumpled with emotion, and he started moving toward Dean. They met in the middle of the aisle. Dean fell into Jerry's arms, and Jerry caught him, holding him up as Dean's legs seemed to give out. Dean was sobbing, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. And Jerry held him, crying too, whispering things that no one else could hear. The two men clung to each other like drowning men cling to life rafts, and everyone watching felt like they were witnessing something sacred, something too intimate for cameras and crowds. "I'm sorry," Dean was saying over and over. "I'm so sorry, Jerry." "I know, Dean. I know," Jerry whispered back. "I'm sorry, too. I'm so sorry." They stood there, two old warriors with all their armor stripped away, just two human beings in pain finding comfort in each other. Frank Sinatra, watching from a few feet away, was crying openly. Sammy Davis Jr. had his hand over his mouth, tears streaming down his face. Grown men and women throughout that church were weeping, not just for Dino, but for Dean and Jerry, for lost time, for the years that pride had stolen from them. When they finally pulled apart, Dean looked at Jerry and said something that only Jerry heard. But later, Jerry would tell his family what Dean had whispered to him in that moment. Dean had said, "He loved you, Jerry." Dino loved his Uncle Jerry.
"He always asked about you."
He never understood why we stopped talking. And now he's gone, and I wasted all those years being stubborn.
"All those years, Jerry."
Gone. Jerry, struggling to speak through his tears, had responded, "We can't get those years back, Dean.
"But we have now."
"We have right now." Dean nodded, and they embraced again, shorter this time, but just as meaningful. And then, with Jerry by his side, Dean walked out to bury his son. The burial at Westwood Village Memorial Park was private, immediate family and closest friends only. But Jerry Lewis was there, standing right beside Dean, exactly where he should have been all along. Frank and Sammy were there too, flanking their brother, creating a wall of love and support around a man who could barely stand. As Dean Paul Martin's casket was lowered into the ground, Dean Martin finally collapsed. Jerry and Frank caught him, holding him up between them, and they stood there, three legends of entertainment, three men who had conquered the world, reduced to the most basic human need, the need to hold and be held in the face of unbearable loss. After the burial, back at the Martin family home, something beautiful happened. Dean, Jerry, Frank, and Sammy sat together in Dean's den, away from the crowds, away from the well-wishers and the cameras. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They just sat there, for old friends who had been through everything together, and they remembered. They remembered the old days, when they were young and everything seemed possible. They remembered the Rat Pack at its height, owning Vegas, making audiences roar with laughter, living like there was no tomorrow. They remembered the stupid fights, the jealousies, the times they let ego get in the way of brotherhood. And they remembered why they had become friends in the first place, because they got each other, because in a world that constantly demanded they be on, they could be themselves with each other. Frank, who had orchestrated the telethon reunion nearly 11 years earlier, said quietly, "I should have done more. I should have made you two talk sooner." Dean shook his head. "We weren't ready, Frank. Some things can't be forced. They have to happen when they're meant to happen." Jerry, sitting next to Dean on the couch, added, "We were both so damn stubborn.
So proud.
We wasted years, Dean. Years." "I know," Dean said softly. "But Dino, he brought us back together. Even in death, he brought us back together." Sammy, ever the empath, said, "Then we honor him by not wasting any more time. No more years lost to pride. We're brothers. That's what we are, and that's what we'll always be." They sat there until the sun went down, for legends who had learned the hardest lesson life can teach. That time is the one thing we can never get back, and the people we love are more important than the pride we protect. In the months and years that followed, Dean and Jerry maintained a relationship. It wasn't what it had been in the old days. That lightning-in-a-bottle magic was gone, used up in their youth. But it was real, and it was honest, and it was built on the ashes of regret and the foundation of genuine love. They talked on the phone occasionally. They saw each other at events. When Dean performed, Jerry would sometimes come to watch, and afterward, they'd have dinner and talk about their kids, their lives, their regrets. Dean Martin never fully recovered from Dino's death. Friends said that the light went out of his eyes that day in March 1987 and never really came back. He continued to perform for a while, but his heart wasn't in it. In 1988, he announced his retirement from performing. The King of Cool was hanging up his microphone. Frank Sinatra tried one more time to reignite the old magic. In 1988, Frank organized what was called the Together Again Tour with Dean and Sammy. It was supposed to be a reunion, a celebration, a chance for the Rat Pack to ride off into the sunset together. But Dean's heart wasn't in it. After just a few shows, he walked away. He couldn't do it anymore. The stage, the lights, the applause, none of it mattered without Dino. Sammy Davis Jr. passed away on May 16th, 1990, from throat cancer. He was 64 years old. Dean attended the funeral, supported by Frank and Jerry. Another brother gone. Another piece of his heart buried. Dean Martin spent his final years quietly, away from the spotlight. He lived in his Beverly Hills home, saw his remaining children and grandchildren, and spent a lot of time alone with his memories. People who saw him in those final years said he seemed at peace in a melancholy way, like someone who had made his peace with loss and was just waiting for his own curtain call. On Christmas Day, 1995, Dean Martin died of acute respiratory failure at his home in Beverly Hills. He was 78 years old. It had been 8 years, 9 months, and 4 days since he buried his son. Those who knew him well said that Dean had really died back in March of 1987, and his body had just taken nearly 9 years to catch up. Jerry Lewis was one of the first people notified of Dean's death. He later said that when he got the call, he sat down and wept like a child. Despite everything, despite the lost years and the pain, Dean had been his brother. And now, like Sammy, like Dino, he was gone. Dean Martin's funeral was held on December 29, 1995, at the Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park, the same place where Dino was buried. Frank Sinatra, now 80 years old and in declining health himself, attended with his wife, Barbara. And Jerry Lewis was there, front and center, saying goodbye to the man who had been his partner, his friend, his brother. The funeral was star-studded but subdued. Shirley MacLaine, Angie Dickinson, Robert Stack, and dozens of other Hollywood legends came to pay their respects. But the moment that everyone remembered was when Jerry Lewis stood up to speak. Jerry, who had made millions laugh, who could command an audience like few others, stood at that podium and could barely get the words out. He talked about meeting Dean for the first time in 1944 at the Glass Hat Club in New York. He talked about how they had clicked immediately, how Dean had been the cool one and Jerry had been the crazy one, and together they had been unstoppable. He talked about the golden years, the laughter, the success. And then he talked about the split, the silence, the wasted years. "I let pride get in the way of love," Jerry said, his voice breaking. "I let ego destroy something beautiful. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. But Dean forgave me. Not with words, but with his presence. When we reunited at Dino's funeral, when he walked across that church to me, he was telling me that love is stronger than pride. That brotherhood is stronger than hurt. And I will carry that lesson with me for whatever time I have left." Jerry paused, looking at Dean's casket, and said, "I love you, Dean. I always did. Even during those 20 years when we didn't speak, I loved you. And I'm sorry we didn't have more time. But I'm grateful for the time we did have. Rest easy, partner. You've earned it." And give Dino a hug from Uncle Jerry. There wasn't a dry eye in the place. Frank Sinatra died on May 14, 1998, just 2.5 years after Dean. He was 82. The chairman of the board, the leader of the Rat Pack, the man who had tried so hard to keep his brothers together, was gone. Jerry Lewis lived until August 20th, 2017, dying at the age of 91 at his home in Las Vegas. In his final years, Jerry spoke often about Dean, about their partnership, their split, and their reunion. He said that the biggest regret of his life was letting pride keep him from speaking to Dean for 20 years. He said that if he could do it all over again, he would have picked up the phone the day after they split and said, "I'm sorry. I love you. Let's fix this." But life doesn't give us do-overs. It gives us lessons, and it's up to us to learn them before it's too late. The story of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, of their split and their reunion, of the funeral where everything changed, is ultimately a story about us. It's about how pride can poison the best relationships. It's about how holding grudges ultimately hurts us more than the people we're angry at. It's about how life is devastatingly short, and the people we love won't be here forever. Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. witnessed something at Dean Paul Martin's funeral that day in 1987 that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. They watched two men who had let decades slip away in silence finally drop their armor and admit what they had always known, that they needed each other, that they loved each other, that time wasted on pride is time lost forever. Nobody expected Dean Martin to walk across that church to Jerry Lewis. Nobody expected to see two legends, two giants of entertainment, reduced to two men crying in each other's arms. Nobody expected that a funeral for a young man gone too soon would become the setting for one of the most powerful reconciliations in Hollywood history. But sometimes, it takes a tragedy to strip away everything unnecessary and show us what really matters. It takes loss to teach us the value of connection. It takes death to remind us to live, to love, to forgive, to let go of the petty grievances and the stubborn pride that keep us from the people who matter most. The image of Dean Martin walking to Jerry Lewis, of Frank and Sammy watching with tears streaming down their faces, of two old warriors finally laying down their weapons, that image transcends the specific story of these four men. It's a mirror held up to all of us, asking, who are you not speaking to because of pride? What relationship have you let deteriorate because neither of you will make the first move? How many more days, weeks, years are you going to let pass before you pick up the phone, send the message, cross the room, and say, I'm sorry. I love you. Let's fix this? Dean Martin lived 8 more years after Dino's death, but those who knew him said he never really lived at all. He existed in a space between life and death, going through the motions, waiting. One of his daughters said that her father died the day Dino did. It just took his body almost 9 years to figure it out. And in those 9 years, at least he had Jerry. At least he had his brothers. At least he didn't die, with that 20-year silence still hanging between them. In the end, all we have is each other. Fame fades. Money disappears. Success becomes a footnote in history books. But love, real love, the kind that makes you walk across a church to embrace someone you haven't spoken to in 20 years, that's eternal. That's what matters. That's what Frank and Sammy saw that day, and that's what moved them to tears. They saw the truth that we all know but so often forget. Life is short, love is rare, and pride is the most expensive thing we can hold on to. So let me ask you, as we come to the end of the story, is there someone you need to call? Someone you need to forgive? Someone you need to apologize to? Don't wait for a tragedy. Don't wait for a funeral. Don't wait until it's too late, and all you have left is regret. Dean Martin taught us many things in his life: how to be cool, how to command a stage, how to make music sound effortless. But in his moment of deepest grief, he taught us the most important lesson of all: pride is never worth losing the people you love. Never. March 27th, 1987. A funeral. A moment. A walk across a church. 2 men embracing. Frank and Sammy watching, crying, understanding. And in that moment, more was said without words than could ever be expressed with them. Nobody expected this, but everyone needed to see it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply let go, walk toward the person we've been avoiding, and say with our presence what our pride wouldn't let us say with our words. I'm sorry. I love you. And nothing, not hurt, not time, not even death can change that. That's the lesson. That's the truth. That's what Frank and Sammy witnessed that day, standing in that church, watching their brothers find their way back to each other in the midst of unbearable grief. And that's a lesson worth remembering, worth sharing, worth carrying with us every single day we're given on this earth. Because none of us knows how much time we have. None of us knows when our last chance to make things right will come. But we all have this moment, right now, to choose love over pride, connection over stubbornness, forgiveness over grudges. Dean and Jerry found their way back. It took 20 years and a tragedy, but they found their way back. What about you? Who do you need to find your way back to? The answer to that question might be the most important thing you take from this story. Don't wait. Don't let pride rob you of one more day with the people who matter. Walk across that room. Make that call. Send that message. Say those words. Because if Dean Martin, the king of cool, could let his walls down and walk to Jerry in front of the world, surely you can do the same. Surely we all can.